What is good, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us once again on another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. Friends, sorry we did not release an episode last week. We had a little bit of a
COVID situation.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. Sergio almost lost his entire palate. It was a terrifying. I don't know. Did you even get it back?
Yeah, I'm better now.
Okay,
especially with taste. But it was like almost an existential crisis moment where I'm like,
it's kind of terrifying.
What do I do if I can't taste coffee? Yeah. I don't think I want to work in coffee if I can't really taste it.
Right.
Maybe.
I mean, you can.
There's still a lot of things you can do without taste,
I guess.
But I think everything I really want to do is in one way or another connected to taste.
Yeah, for sure. I had that experience back in September, October, where I had something to do with my nose or something where I couldn't taste it. Like I could taste like onions and like meat and vegetables and stuff like that. Coffee just tasted like water, like slightly flavored water. And I was like, we had a cup coffee, Sam. Yep. It was terrifying. I stuck a bunch of eucalyptus essential oils up my nose and it cleared up the next day.
That's not bad.
Yeah. Okay, good. But it was 2 weeks of, I was like, wow, what happens if this is just, what do you do?
I have no idea.
It's terrifying.
That would be weird.
I didn't plan this, but it's kind of what we're going to talk about on the podcast.
Like, this is a good time.
Yeah, this is good. What is it called?
Segue.
Segue. Yes. But before we do that, we're going to taste some batchy, like always.
No, dude, this should have been even coarser. I know we were debating on whether the grind size was correct because this coffee is super weird.
Oh, man. It's already pretty coarse, but
right.
This is hard. Anyways, this is a bummer.
Yeah. Not worth finishing.
It's a good coffee in itself. It just, this is a classic problem for mostly Ethiopians, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
They just clog, they choke, they take forever to draw down. There's fines issues, and it's hard. This is honestly one thing why I've just been avoiding Ethiopians, because I'm terrified of buying a bag of coffee that clogs and you can't really brew it. You go too coarse, it loses flavor. You go slightly finer, all of a sudden now it chokes and you're lost with kind of coffee tasting coffee. But I will say though, I've gotten a couple of good pour overs of this coffee. I brewed an AeroPress today.
I thought so. And
it was spanking. And I think because AeroPress, you can actually force your drawdown because you're plunging it.
Right.
So you can actually have a little bit more control than just waiting for it to percolate through the V60 or the Calito or whatever. So it was actually tasty. It was not mind-boggling, but it was pretty solid.
Yeah.
So
I wonder how it would do on the Tricolite.
Oh yeah,
because there's a lot of pitfalls to choking on the Tricolite too, because water can only run through one surface area rather than.
But it has a pretty wide surface area. Yeah,
it does. Yeah,
which helps maybe
for lower doses. That's exactly why. Yeah. There's potential on that.
Or this is where I think the Oria or whatever the Oria.
Oh right.
I'm intrigued. I actually kind of want to cop one just because it's. But then there's also the Alika brewer that I just saw come up on social media.
Alika Lifties?
Yeah.
Oh.
His brewer that has it's a flat base as well, but it has these giant holes at the bottom for a faster flow rate. For example, the April brewer also has some modulation at the bottom. It's a flat base brewer, so I'm intrigued if those modulations help with a problem like that. Or
my Stag has modulations too.
That's a whole podcast in its own right there.
I have 3 or 4 extra holes in my Stag, and they're much bigger.
And
it's super fast.
Does it help with coffees that clog like this?
Yeah, of course. But
Well,
I'm
maybe
brewing
that's
like
what I needed to do.
I'm brewing very big doses.
Yeah.
Yeah, like 23, 25, 360, 370 out.
Man.
So
maybe I need to just snag a brewer just to brew my Ethiopian coffees. Yeah. That being said, we cupped some Ethiopian coffees, some samples. We might have a previous producer right back. Blindly kind of killed the table.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Another cupping. We have a lot of samples to cup.
It's also a fun new varietal. I'm stoked to have back. Well, actually, we didn't have it before.
Yeah, kind of, maybe. So lots of fun stuff. Honestly, like that table excited me. We have a Colombian coffee that we're gonna drop that is a freaking banger. So lots of fun stuff on the way. But that being said, speaking of Ethiopian coffees choking and then losing your flavor palette, what came to mind for me as we were talking about what do we talk about on the podcast was that I'm realizing more and more that the coffee experience has mostly, I mean, let's start big. The coffee experience for a very long time was just caffeine. How do I get my caffeine hit? Yeah. And that's why I need to, don't talk to me before I have my coffee in the morning, which is an absolute ridiculous meme or comment or, those signs that you get at TJ Maxx or at Ross that have those things on them, or like yawn is a silent cry for coffee. It's like, guys, stop. No, we need to.
I have not heard that one. I like that one. I want to get the tattoo.
How could you have heard that one?
Yawn is a silent cry for coffee. Yeah. Oh my word, that's excellent. I need to get that tattooed. Been living
under a rock. I have no idea. Wow, I'm shocked. Anyways, yeah, that whole like caffeine thing, like, and that was a very real thing for a very long time in the coffee industry, and well, not just the coffee industry, just normal consumption.
Yeah. Dancing goats.
Yeah,
I mean, the origin, right?
And then
story, I guess.
And then over the last like 20 years, as we saw the emergence of third wave and specialty, that we've started to focus a little bit more on flavor, of taste, and scoring flavor and evaluating flavor, which, to be honest, is a really big thing because, like you said, even if I lost my palate, I don't know if I'd want to drink coffee anymore for the caffeine hit.
Right. Yeah.
Flavor is actually like a really, really massive, it's just a massive thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's what makes these coffee experiences memorable for a lot of us. We've talked about this on previous episodes.
Yes.
Was what was your like coffee enlightenment story?
Yes.
And both of us talked about the experience of taste that we had, whether that was brewing it at home and experimenting with different grind size and then realizing how the coffee flavor changes. Because technically you can still get caffeine with very, very bad grind size. Or wrong, not bad, but wrong grind size, right?
Yeah.
You can have a coffee be super bitter and still have caffeine levels that you want for the morning, or you can actually have a very flavorful coffee and it still has the good caffeine level. So the difference there, when the enlightenment process happens for many folks, it's around flavor.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the next step when you're like, oh man, coffee doesn't always have to taste this way. And that sentence in itself is a lot of the times used in talking about the progression of what happens in your coffee experience journey.
I'm glad you brought up that enlightenment period, because I think that's a really big pivotal moment for a lot of us. Is the reason we do get into either working in coffee or start taking it on as like a very intense hobby that we absolutely obsess over, is that enlightenment period. It's because of the flavor. It's because we realized, wait, all of our life we've just been drinking it as just a caffeine hit, and then all of a sudden now we can get the caffeine, but it can taste really good and nuanced and complex, which is a big thing. But I also think the more I'm in this industry, the more I'm realizing that it's kind of morphed into so much more than also the flavor, the taste, that it's actually becoming a whole experience that has, that has to do with, for example, like the aromas For example, it's the gear, it's the extraction, it's the that whole experience of making a coffee at home with a pour over. It's the for some of us it's like a ritual that you can. People are like, well, why would you spend like 7 minutes on a cup of coffee just brewing it? It's because it's a whole experience.
Yeah,
and I think there's like a couple main things, a couple main pillars that have found its way into this experience that we don't even realize it, but it's actually a massive part of the experience.
Yep. Yeah. And again, it made me think of a Keurig at home. To many folks who have a Keurig, it's the experience of a Keurig. The reason it's positive, it's because it's quick. But when you have the taste experience, it leads to a whole new, bigger, more dynamic experience of the progress of how do I achieve that taste. So I think from caffeine to taste, the next thing that it would lead to is actually not to use the word vibe, but the whole vibe around coffee.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like whether that's at home brewing with all your gear, taking your time to control your flow rate out of a gooseneck kettle, or going into a cafe and being like inspired by the space. Yeah. Maybe the color of the walls, the way the bar is laid out, where people are sitting, the noises of a cafe, walking in, hearing, someone knocking out a puck. Those kind of experiences are so much bigger. So now you're experiencing coffee, what it does to your body. You're experiencing powerful flavor, but now you're experiencing the vibe and the atmosphere of coffee. Yeah. Which is weird. It's still coffee, you know what I mean? But now it's people.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a completely, for you listeners, just ask yourself, like, when you walk into a really beautiful space, when you walk into places like Proud Mary, when you walk into places like, what's that big in New York? What is it, Felix?
Felix, yeah.
It's just like insane. The first time I walked into Onyx headquarters, the roastery, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is insane. And all of a sudden, before you've ever even gotten into anywhere, you're already experiencing something inspiring, creative, empowering. And what you said actually in a meeting the other day was really, like, for me, was really fantastic. Actually, when you said, when we're talking about the designing some of our stuff with a designer, and you kind of correlated it to, like, when you walk into into a cafe, the moment you walk in is already an experience. It's visual. It's the atmosphere. And a lot of people pay a lot of money for it to feel a certain way, and for very good reasons, because I think it's a huge part of the whole experience. And you also touched upon, like, the brewing at home, the gooseneck, and the first thing that came to mind for me is, like, the impact of social media that has had on this whole thing. Yep. So, you go onto a coffee page, all of a sudden, you see, whether it's gooseneck kettles, the Pearl scale, or the iconic EK photo, or my all-time favorite, and I hope one day I get to experience this on an origin trip, but it's those, like, the Indonesian vibes where it's like pouring down rain. They're in this, like, insanely beautifully aesthetic place, and they're like brewing with this, like, strange, like, Asian kettle that I've never seen before. It's like everything is just so perfect, and it's like, I don't know, there's like a creative, not to sound weird, but like a creative vibe, like creative aura, like,
exactly,
like and it's like, and I think that has seeped itself or has flowed into the experience. And that goes also, you can speak a little bit about this, but, like, when you're buying from a roastery, it's like, what does their Instagram look like? What's their aesthetics? What's the brand visuals? What's the bag look like? What kind of information do they have on the bag? What are the colors? Like, it's all things creative. I don't know.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was super intrigued about at my first SCA Expo, is the bag competition. I remember coming back to Social Grounds, and Jason and I were just processing the SCA, and I was just fascinated by the fact, like, yes, we drink coffee, yes, we can brew coffee, but But there's an element of coffee that to me was so fascinating, was the fact that you can be a bag designer, you can be a graphic designer in the coffee industry, and you can actually be noticed for that. You know, the iconic bag that so many folks probably have seen, the Methodical, right? With the florals and all of that.
Beautiful.
And it's like, it's iconic. Or Sweet Bloom is another one. They use the classic coffee plant that to me is iconic. And now Onyx Coffee Labs box. No one has that box. And there's elements of the experience that is in the packaging itself. Before you taste the coffee, you experience the brand already. And therefore, it makes tasting the coffee a new experience. Whether that's like, you know, you can get the same origin from multiple roasting companies. But the actual experience of opening the bag, dosing out, and the visuals changes things.
For sure. And not to dwell on this for too long, because we have a couple other points that we want to touch upon. But I respect a lot like narratives, coffee choosing tactic or strategy, which is just blind cupping and blind tasting every 3 or 4 months or so, and doing it all blind and scoring blind. And I love that because I think it creates a very unbiased coffee selection. Like, hey, you might not have ever wanted to ever serve this roasting company, because you just didn't have a couple of great experiences with them. You don't think they're really great. They don't fit your preference. But when you cup them blindly, all of a sudden you choose it and you're like, wait a second, what? And there's two sides of that coin, but that goes to show how much like the look of the product itself, everything but the coffee bean, how big of an impact it does to your experience. You know, some people will say before they even try the coffee, they already think it's good.
Right. Exactly.
And it could be good. But it could also be not so good. But because of that first initial experience, there's something psychological there. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It just goes to show how creative actually the industry is, and how much that matters, the visuals, the aesthetics.
And I think just to go off what you said about narratives, choosing the coffee, like on the back end, choosing blindly is great. There's a benefit to that. But what I like on the front end, when those coffee bags go up on our shelves, there's always a new experience. There's a little bit of that diversity of experience. When you have Veltins has been a staple, the same bag kind of sit on the shelf. Everybody's comfortable with the Veltins experience. But then if you, at one point when you would look down, you would see the Nemesis boxes, and that's a whole new coffee experience. And then you look down and you see the dialed classic kind of quote unquote Nordic looking Manhattan bags. And now the 3 on the shelf just changed the whole atmosphere of the retail shelf and then the coffees that you're about to experience at Narrative. Sure. So I think that's important. Again, there's no like one dialed way because there's multiple experiences within that. So for a roasting company, that's a big part about like actually helping people understand what you're bringing to the table. Yes, the difference in the coffee flavor because of how we roast. But then the difference of receiving that package in the mail.
For sure.
That's a very big deal, especially for us because we're heavy on the e-commerce side. We're heavy about receiving the package and the unboxing element. So that's important. Like, you know what I mean? That's a big part from a roaster's perspective is how's that. Cat and Cloud talks about this a lot too.
Yeah, it's a big thing, no doubt. I think the second thing that I think impacts or is included in the coffee experience, I think is stuff that we get to touch and experience outside of the coffee itself. And I think, it's mugs. It's, this whole the fellow tasting glass. Like when I got it, that was iconic. The fellow Carter mug, I loved it. This trend with the Groove, like double walled shot glasses, like, I'm all here for it. Like all these like vessels, this Hasami mug, holy cow. I remember my first experience at Narrative with them and I was like, why would you want to drink out of this? Like, it feels so rough. And then you drink it and you're like, oh, this is like this is part of the experience of the coffee and itself, I mean, you've been to, I'm thinking back to the Proud Mary, like the glasses, the glasses, they look like wine glasses almost, but not really, because they don't have the stem. It's just, I don't know. It's
a stemless.
It's so just powerful. But I think now that I think about it, it's not just that. It's also, the feel of your kettle. It's the textures, it's the, I don't know, even the fellow like Atmos container, or, or it's a stir spoon, like all these little like accessories or vessels. But for me, I think the mug itself plays such a rich experience, part of the, it plays a big role of the experience.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think as a barista, one of the things I'm glad that I still use on a regular occasion is the tamper. That would change everything. Imagine just feeling the pressure and feeling the tamper in your palm, the fingers, the contact points. That's one of the things I've been just sitting on and thinking about, is all the contact points in preparing coffee.
Yeah.
Right? So imagine not having to do that. Like, I'm not against the puck press, but it's a completely different feeling and a completely different connection with coffee when you stick it in and automatically grind 16 grams, and then you stick it in and automatically does that. And there's only like 2 major motions. But even remember, you'd go into cafes with like dosers, and you would be, and then you had to do the method of distribution with your finger, the northwest, whatever. And then I forgot the proper term for it. But that touch, touching the coffee itself. And then, finally, when you're consuming, what kind of couch are you sitting on? What kind of chair are you sitting on? How does that feel paired with the mug, that's what I, again, referring to, like, for example, comparing the narrative space experience with a Hasami mug versus the Santo space and experience with, forgot the vessels they use, but they're very kind of modern, almost remind me of like, have this like Asian drive to the experience, but it really matches the aesthetic of the cafe. And even some of their chairs where you're sitting, they're kind of like almost like a concrete block on that lip there. It would be different having that experience with a Hasami mug. See what I mean? So all of the points of contact, whether in your hand, in your like on your lips, but also like what you're feeling when you're sitting.
For sure. And I think, man, outside of the cafe, it's like, I think all of us, like, for those take coffee this seriously and this nerdy, we have like a routine that we do when we finish brewing a cup of coffee. Like, even the vessel of what you're brewing into. Like, whether you're brewing into the fellow, I don't know, the double walled glass, a carafe, or whatever, the server, or, it's like, even that experience of like, you finish a brew, you swirl it around, you maybe stick your nose in there, you pour it into your mug, and then usually there's like a general thing that I think we naturally have our own quirks of where we go, whether we sit on the couch, or maybe you go just stand out on the porch, or maybe you go take a walk down your neighborhood, or whatever it is. Like, that's all part of the coffee experience, because, at the end of the day, if you're not making coffee, you completely take that out. You might walk down the street. You might still sit on your couch, but it's completely different,
right?
But that also adds to the coffee experience. Get a geisha and then go sit on a freaking rock out in the corner.
Totally.
Like, that's probably not going to feel the same way as if you go brew yourself a geisha and then you sit down with a beautiful view of some mountain or whatever. It's completely different. So that's just very interesting.
For sure. But, I mean, gosh, I love talking about this because my mind goes in so many places. Like, you're right. It's like the difference in experiencing, like, in the stillness of the morning and the quietness. And you can almost hear the air, and you're slurping, and the slurp is like insanely loud because it's so quiet. Right?
Yeah.
Versus taking your first sip at the first red light on the way to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so different.
That's so profound right there. Yeah.
But it's still the coffee experience. That's how I hope what folks are hearing in this conversation is how big and dynamic the coffee experience is.
Yes. I mean, now that you mentioned that, I mean, that moment when you unscrew your fellow Carter mug and there's like a drip still on the lid and it drips onto your pants or like onto your shirt, like right here, right in the middle. And you're like, God, now you have to live with that coffee stain for the rest of the day. That's the experience, you know, it might not be a good one, but it's part of the experience. That's excellent. Wow. We should just end with that, but no. I think one thing that we absolutely have to acknowledge also is a big part of the coffee experience is the information and the education. And just like whether that's, you know, with wine where you look at, you know, an offering list at a restaurant, or, you know, you're going to select something, you see a bunch of gibberish language on there, but it's all communicating something interesting, you know, or you pick up a bag of coffee and you see a geisha varietal that reminds you of these flavor notes that's processed this way, that's from this origin, from this producer. All of those things play a massive role in the coffee experience. Yeah. There's something to say for when you know what the label looks like. Like, I mean, think about, to drive this point home, man, my mind is just so scattered now because there's so much to say, but like when somebody approaches a bag of coffee who does not know what anything means on the bag other than Ethiopia and it's beans. Yep. And then compare that with somebody who has that background, has that sense of information, how much more that the information on the bag means and impacts their experience. Yep. And it's not, the point here is not to say, well, if you don't know these things, then you can't experience coffee, but it's more to say that actually your experience, I think your experience, the bar gets raised when you can grasp and understand kind of the backstory, of the information.
Yeah, I think what you're describing there is the foundation or the anchoring aspect of the coffee experience. A lot of the other things we talked about were like kind of emotive, kind of driven by emotions. They're maybe quote unquote mystical, like, you know what I mean? Almost spiritual for some folks. But this education part, and when we start digging into origin, producer, that's triggering kind of the mind sector of our coffee experience. So now we're learning, we're understanding, we're collecting data, and we're taking that information and we're tying it with that emotional and mystical experience. Yes. So it becomes, again, that much more dynamic. So now you realize that when you're sipping that geisha and you're having this crazy experience at home, you know, on your couch, you're now realizing the connection it has to whether that was Panama, or even take it farther back, the fact that that varietal traveled from Ethiopia to Panama. And you're understanding that. And then when you have a name tied to it and you see maybe a photo on a card that you receive with it, all of a sudden you're drinking that and you can imagine the person's face and the person's experience in that. And like all of the other like informational, educational aspects, you understand like, okay, this took a lot of hands and a lot of hard work to produce. So it makes that whole experience of like all of our senses start to connect and become more like one together.
It adds context to your cup.
Yes, that's very good.
I think, I mean, when you add in the whole travel aspect, that's a whole completely different ballgame. Like when I went to a couple times to Guatemala, my first trip to Guatemala, it was like, oh, this is eye-opening. Now when I'm drinking Guatemala, those images and those experiences are flashing in my mind now, and it's completely different. And I think that's also like, not to beat a dead horse, and if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, it's also a big part of why we want to be able to tell the stories of producers that we've partnered with year over year, and be able to bring that to you, is that so you can be drinking, a cup of coffee of Jorge Mendez's, El Panal coffee, and be able to, have watching a film about him and his family and his farms while you're drinking your coffee from your Hasami mug on your couch, fully immersed into the experience. And that is, I think, powerful. That is immersive. That is just epic, you know? And I think that is just, I think the education, the information, having that context is absolute. It changes the whole experience. I mean, it literally, I think that the difficulty here is realizing that for some of us who have been in this for a while now, it's second nature. That we don't even recognize that we look at and notice certain things and notice names and things get highlighted in our minds, and we drink certain coffees for specific reasons because we know all this information on the back end. And it actually means something to us. So.
And I think the anchoring question to the whole coffee experience is how deep or how far do you want to go? Because as technology starts to progress and as things grow, we can take the experience very far. You know, with virtual reality, augmented reality,
it's gonna happen.
Like you can experience a cup of coffee at Origin in the morning. That could happen. And the anchoring question is like, how far do you want to go? Like you could potentially still drink coffee for caffeine. And to a degree, that's totally fine. Like no judgment there. We enjoy the aspects of caffeine, a cup of coffee. Of course. It's great. You could also travel to Origin and experience some caffeine. Like that's a very big, that's a whole different experience, but they're all experiences around coffee. And I think that's the big thing that we're, I think, talking about here is whether for us as a roasting company, how can we bring more of that experience to folks' lives, or for us as coffee consumers, like how far do we want to go into this experience?
100%. Before you even said that, I was already thinking about VR and being able to see those, be able to see that in real time, to be able to even experience that from your home is insane. The future of what's gonna happen. But I think that's a solid place to end. We're gonna wrap that up right there. I think you said it really well. I'm glad you brought that conclusion that you can experience it at multiple levels. Like that's up to you to decide. So, well, folks, hopefully this gave you some insight and just made you realize how interesting and complex and fascinating the coffee experience is beyond just the flavor of the cup. But we'd love to know your thoughts and ideas. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below about some of your ideas about this conversation, interesting topic. DM us, email us, get into contact with us. Let's start the conversation. But anyways, that being said, hopefully you guys all enjoyed this conversation. But one last thing, as we always say, remember, folks, reflect what's good.